Greetings everyone and welcome to a special edition of the BlastCast. I am Jarvis and with me today I have MHE. Of course this is his third return to the show officially, not counting the DCS videos. And he wants to go over something about gunnery and projectiles and how they work in dogfighting. He's been spending several weeks putting this together. We've been helping him review the papers and correct little errors and spelling mistakes. So that he's been doing the bulk of the work by a long shot. And he's ready to go ahead and present this to both the Star Citizen community and hopefully the developers will see it as well. Alright, so why don't you go ahead and introduce what this topic is about?
Yeah, hi everyone. So, you probably remember me from my previous appearances from the show. And yeah, what I've been working on is we've seen Flight playing itself out, and recently we've got these exciting news about how the future flight mechanics will work, and I'm super happy with the direction they're taking now. But for some reason, we've always had problems with gunnery, and then I went into like, okay, why is that? So flight was, the main culprit was rotations and the crazy accelerations, and all that stuff seems to be going to the right direction now, so I think it was time to address gunnery. And I was looking at data, so what is in the game that makes gunnery work the way it does, what kind of considerations do you have for how much lead distance and all the pips and all these things, how are they connected? And I just started to draw it out for myself in the first place to understand how all these things are connected, and then I started like, okay, this is how it works, and I stumbled over the reasons why it sucks the way it does, and I thought, okay, this is how it's interconnected, and what can we do about it?
And that's the important thing when you're developing any systems in a video game is programming is math. No matter what you're doing or how you're approaching it, all things have to work together, and they have to work logically, sensibly, and interconnect smoothly. If you just create random values, you end up with an incoherent mess, and I think this information you put together will help them align the weapons, the way they work, with the speeds that they're showing in the game.
Yes, exactly. I mean, they have committed to pretty much Second World War speeds and turn rates and all these angular value ballparks just by putting realistic G-forces in there. So if they say, okay, this is going to be a thing, I mean, you can still adjust the G-forces and say, okay, by magic sci-fi tech, we can improve them or increase them, the limits by, I don't know, 50% over current day things. Then you will still end up with similar things to what you have in current day jet fighter turn rates, because these are not linear functions. Look at the SCM speeds they demoed in the recent flight model presentation at CitizenCon and also the recent RTV. What we will see most likely is the SCM speed limiter, or the typical combat speeds, playing themselves out in the ballpark of between, I don't know, 200 to 250 meters per second. And that coincidentally happens to be the top speeds of the P-51 Mustang and Messerschmitt MA-262. Pretty spot on if you convert them from knots or miles per hour into meters per second.
And of course there'll be links down below in the description that's going to help you look at his document, and he's going to post this up on Spectrum as well, so I'll have a link to those things, his post. They should have a link to the document in there, and you can look at this. This is a very well-written, long document. It's like 22, 23 pages. You've included graphs, charts, you've explained the math, and you've got it all broken down in a way that you even start off very nicely in this document where you break down the basics, like to explain how these values are derived and what these values mean and how they apply. And you know, for those people who are versed in this math already, this is going to be the, you know, you can probably skip past that section, but the breakdowns immediately following the explanations will, I think, be a real eye-opener for you.
Well, my aim was to, you have to start with the basic math, because in some cases it has been quite a while since people have used stuff like a right triangle or a sine or cosine functions for the last time. And I'm no math teacher, but I thought it would be a good idea to have a little refresher on the basics in there. But of course, if somebody says, okay, yeah, I still know all that, or I already know it, yeah, just skip over it and no harm done. And yeah, the overall document is now 23 pages. That's not including the attachments. It is downloadable in the description link, and this in the Spectrum. I don't have all the stuff in the Spectrum posting, so only the basic is in the Spectrum post, and the download of the document has the full fat version with all the graphs and all the formulas and all the data tables linked. So the first thing we could probably start with is the firing solution. So like, okay, you have your pip on screen that tells you point weapon here and fire. But how does it know? So the first thing you have to know is, okay, your target has a certain size, and this size translates into an angular equivalent that makes up a certain size on your screen. So the closer your target is, of course it has a certain size, the closer it comes, the more real estate of your screen it starts to fill. So if we look at this picture on screen here, we have the hornet that is being shot at, and the hornet is traveling vertically upwards, and the gladius, now trying to hit the hornet, has a distance to the target, which is obviously named target distance, and it has a firing distance to a projected point in the future. The lead distance, which is the distance between the hornet and its projected future location at point P1, which is also at a certain time, the lead distance itself depends only on the ratio between the hornet's own travel speed and bullet speed of the projectile that the gladius is shooting on at the hornet. Because the firing distance is determined by, okay, how far is the thing away? But the lead distance is actually determined by time. So the hornet flies at a certain speed, but if my bullet only takes half the speed covering the firing distance, the lead distance will only be half as long. So what you can do is say, okay, you either make the hornet twice or 3 times as agile, so it can dodge incoming fire, which was the crap it did in the past, and this is how we ended up at 20, 30 G bullshit crazy accelerations in all directions. Or what you can do is you make the bullet slower, and therefore increase the lead angle and encourage being a little bit closer, lining up your shots, because when you can fire at and reliably hit a target irrespective of what is happening, it becomes what is known as aim-centric. I think we've heard that before, haven't we?
Once or twice in this channel, yeah. Aim-centric has come up.
Yeah, so let's talk about how does acceleration factor into that. Previously, we've seen, okay, we have this projected future location and time that we assume the hornet will be after our bullet flight time has passed, but it can create a problem. So once I've shot my bullet, I don't know what the hornet is going to do until the time it gets there. I can just say, okay, depending on how the hornet will try to deviate from its current movement vector during the duration of my bullet flight time, it will end up in some kind of area. It will be somewhere in there, but I cannot really say with exact precision where it will be. And how large this area of possible future locations is depends on the acceleration capability of the hornet, because acceleration just says how hard can I deviate from my current vector within the time frame that is given by the bullet flight time. And we've seen the developers saying, okay, accelerations are coming down now, so we will have flight that would be actually survivable by humans. So I fully welcome that addition, but at the same time, it would shorten the lead distance and make it very, very easy to hit target. And we've read player feedback from CitizenCon where they said, okay, they tried out current gunnery considerations, or they tried out current gunnery as it stands with the new flight model, and they said, oh, engagement ranges have drastically increased. So they now had circle strafe fights somewhere between 400 and 700 meters, I've read on the Spectrum Mark. That was weird. So why does it happen? Of course, it happens because Hornet, or the enemy, now has a lot less acceleration capability. Therefore, it has much less capability to deviate from its current course, so I can make a lot more accurate predictions about its future location. And now I have still very, very fast weapons, very, very precise aim, and a target that has a lot less capability to deviate from its current course. So what does that make? That makes for a lot more aim bias. So it will be more aim-centric if you just take everything as it stands now and just bring down the accelerations of the ships. Then you will have even more aim-centric combat. And that for now, since we're in a transitional phase, that is a good thing. Simply because it shows, okay, flight is going into the direction it should. Yes, I don't want to be able to zoom snipe everybody with pretty much all weapons at distances in excess of 500 or 1,000 meters in small fighter combat. That's not what it's supposed to be. So what do? Well, you bring gunnery in line with it. And this is where we enter bullet speeds.
Yeah, we've brought up, gunnery has been the sacred cow for the longest time in Star Citizen, and in fact, when you look at the data on a lot of the weapons, there's no consistency when you look at like the velocities of the rounds. You'll have some very slow rounds in Star Citizen, you have some really ridiculously fast rounds, and looking at your chart here,
I looked at real-world data because we don't design the Second World War, so aerial combat as it occurred in the Second World War could be, or probably a little bit cynically phrased, it was emergent gameplay simply because physics are what they are and the state of technology was what it was. The aircrafts had a certain speed available to them, they had a certain acceleration and turn capability. Human physiology was what it was. So yeah, you had these limitations, and everybody said, okay, we're gonna go as close to these limitations as we can to maximize our potential. And at the same time, you had weapons that were trying to shoot these aircraft down, and also the aircraft shooting these weapons at each other. What happens when you look at the projectile speeds between Star Citizen, that tries to be Second World War, and the projectile speeds that were used in Second World War, you will notice a quite drastic difference. So I calculated that on average, when you look at the data that is linked inside the document and also in the thread, the speed data that you had in Second World War for aircraft-mounted guns was somewhere in between, let's say, 700 and 1,000 meters per second, give or take. If we look at Star Citizen data, that is not the case at all.
You have it written here as 1,753 meters per second on average, and some of the weapons go up to 2,200 to 2,500.
A value that would not be unrealistic, because that happens to be in line with the current what you can find on publicly available data on experimental naval railguns.
Yeah, for a railgun it makes sense. That's like what you find out on the Idris.
Exactly. So the 2500 was the size 10 mass driver, but all the other stuff. So the slowest weapon in Star Citizen, which is the unguided rocket pods, is already one of the fastest weapons in real life. And then you say, okay, well, what does that mean? So we said the lead angle and the lead distance, first and foremost, depends on the ratio of speeds between how fast the target flies and how fast your bullet travels. When you say, okay, my bullet in Second World War traveled at 800 meters per second or something, which is already quite fast. I have some data linked in there, so I can look up at least some common stuff from the era and also some current day stuff. Let's say somewhere in between 800 and 1,000 meters per second is the ballpark you would go for unguided projectiles. Then you go into Star Citizen and see they are on average around 1,700 meters per second. That is, if you go from the 800 meters per second baseline, that is more than double on average. And you go up to quite more than double in the worst cases. So what you do is, if you calculate the ratio of projectile speed versus flight speed for Second World War era aircraft, you end up with somewhere between 1 versus 3, so 1-to-3 ratio or 1-to-4 ratio, something like that. And when you do the same with the combat speeds that you're limited to due to G-forces, so the turn combat speeds, or SCM limits, as you can call them, this ratio goes to 1-to-7 up to 1-to-9, and that is quite significant.
Right, because it eliminates the need for any... Well, it eliminates basically the ability to get out of the way. Someone shoots at you, you're pretty much going to get hit. There's not much opportunity to get out of the way. There's a very, very, very tiny window.
The whole problem is, by having these ridiculously fast bullet speeds, what you do is you make the area of uncertainty, because your bullet, when it's so fast, doesn't take a lot of time to travel. You make this area of uncertainty of your pip very, very small. You also make the lead distance very, very small. And people say like, oh yeah, but sometimes I have to already lead my target with my cursor or my nose or whatever you aim with already quite a bit. It's like, yep. And this is why you would have to maneuver in your enemy's 6 o'clock position to hit something, because when you lower the bullet speeds and you cannot just shoot at an enemy that's defensively maneuvering sideways to you to maximize your lead angle, to create the biggest possible problem, I have what is called an angle off, which is the angle between your current nose axis and the enemy's travel direction axis. For the purpose of simplification, I just assumed that the ships were actually flying in the direction they're designed to, which will be very much in line with what the new upcoming flight model is, and that we're not backwards boost side strafing all over the place, because that creates a whole different problem that is next to impossible to calculate on paper. If you look at what is called an angle off, suddenly, when you maneuver in a way that your enemy is not flying perpendicular to you anymore, so you're actually trying to chase him a little bit and get behind him to get a few good shots in, you will see that by decreasing your angle off, your lead distance will remain more or less the same, but your lead angle will decrease drastically. If the projected point in time of my target is always in front of his nose, but if I'm exactly behind him, I will hit him nonetheless, because this point will be just ahead of him and he will be in my bullet flight path, so to speak. So I don't have to offset my aim point somewhere sideways to him. I just shoot straight at him. And that is the position I want to be in, because that reduces my targeting problem. For the sake of having this area of uncertainty small, and also his time window for escaping my shots relatively small, I have to move closer. Because if my bullets travel at the same speed for a change now, all of a sudden, yeah, if I fire that bullet, it might hit him, but it's based on the assumption that it doesn't move in the next 5 seconds. Well, it's of course an exaggerated value, but at least you have a realistic chance of escaping incoming fire without having to resort to absolutely unsurvivable acceleration values. And the lead distance, since the ship flight is capped by G-forces, will have to be created by bringing down the bullet speeds. And you say, well, but the bullet speeds are only 2 or 3 times as high from what they used to be. And yeah, but if you go for the authentic speeds, you have to do it for the projectiles as well. And when you look at how far off they are, they're like, okay, let's do the math. Roughly speaking, at usual cruise altitudes of aircraft, the speed of sound is pretty much 300 meters a second, give or take. If you are off from the 800 meters by like 700 meters per second on average, that is a deviation of 900. So 800 meters is the supposed value, 1700 is what we have on average. Difference is being 900. The good news is you're only off by 3 times the speed of sound.
Yeah, that's a huge mess. And this is I mean, it's a very interesting read, folks. You've got to take the time to go through this. He's put weeks of work into this. In fact, right now you just got done flying for your job, so you're actually doing this from a hotel, right?
I'm currently sitting in a hotel. Yeah.
So he's gone out of his way
trip
here to like get this information out to us. And you know, this is a really fascinating read, and it gets deeper than this, because you're going to get into rotation rates. You're going to get into inherited velocities of projectiles. There's so much more to this than what we've even covered here, and so you've got to check this out. It talks about ESP, interactive mode, how this works with gimbals, what needs to be done with gimbals to make this work, and all the different possibilities therein. He's laid this out in a very, very concise, very logical, and readable format. I really can't recommend this highly enough. This, I think, will open up a lot of eyes to seeing exactly what we've been talking about for the longest time, that you can't just adjust the flight model and then not touch the gunnery. These things are interconnected, and you cannot have gunnery dictate flight, which is there was a lot of things in 2.6 I wasn't a fan of. I'll just be frank about that. But the biggest failing of 2.6 was that they didn't touch that sacred cow. The slower ships went, the easier they were to hit, because the guns didn't change. So this is, if they don't make this kind of change at what he's showing here and what he's trying to explain, it's going to be just like that again. So they need to do this at the same time, and with the numbers he's provided, they can use this as a nice rough boundary. Like, here's what World War II projectile speeds were from here to here, and then do the same thing with their weapons. Here's our lower limit, here's our upper limit. And I guarantee you, if they do something like this, it's going to change the way that you approach combat. It is absolutely so important for them to look at what he's done here and take it into consideration. It's a fantastic paper, and if you don't read it, you're doing yourself a disservice. You really are. As I said, he's put weeks of work into it, guys. So down below is going to be the link to his post, and in there he's also going to have a link to the rotation conundrum, which is one we did earlier, which will explain other parts that are also talked about in this paper. Read the document first, please, before you start posting in Spectrum saying that something wasn't there or whatnot. Just really give some time to read it and give it some thought, and then ask some questions. We'll be happy to go ahead and give feedback. Well, mostly MHE, because he knows way more about this than I do, and I'm not afraid to say that. I mean, these guys are the experts. I just have a bunch of guys that I know that are more technically knowledgeable than I am, but feel the same way about things. So MHE is absolutely one of them. Also, the BlastCast will probably be coming out on Wednesday this week, because I don't want to bunch this video up with the other one. We are going to talk about the reverse of the verse this week. There was a lot talked about when it comes to the flight and flight changes, and also all the things around it. I've listened to the show, I've taken notes, there are some things in there we do want to go over. So there's going to be 2 BlastCasts this week. Just how it's going to be. This is one of those busy weeks. I wasn't expecting one this soon after CitizenCon, but, it is what it is. Outside of that, for what goes for the rest of the week, still in the air. Alright, everyone, well, that's about it for, not this week's BlastCast, for this part of this week's BlastCast. And, as I said, check out that link below. We'll catch you in the next one.
Thanks for having me, and yeah, looking forward to the next time. See you all.